Hey, welcome to Agnes Thompson's channel. My name's Doris, and I'm going to share my story with you.
My Los Angeles home, having weathered decades, had always been my anchor. More than just walls and a roof, it was a living organism, imbued with memories. Every creak of the floorboards, every sunbeam piercing through the old curtains, told its own story. For me, Helen, 75 in 2025, these stories were more precious than gold. I always believed that the past wasn't a dead weight, but invisible threads connecting us to those who came before us and those who would come after. My greatest treasure wasn't stocks or jewelry, but our family history, meticulously collected and carefully preserved in old, leather-bound volumes, and, of course, letters. Hundreds of letters. I lived alone, after my beloved George passed 10 years ago. The silence in the house was sometimes deafening, but I learned to find solace in it, immersing myself in my books, my garden, and, of course, my memories. Retirement in America in 2025 is a whole different ballgame. Medicare doesn't cover nearly everything, and every doctor's visit, every new pill, was a cause for concern. I learned to be frugal, to budget down to the penny, but I still felt stretched thin. My children, Sarah and Tom, always offered help, but I prided myself on my independence. I didn't want to be a burden. My main concern wasn't for myself, but for them, and, of course, for my grandchildren, Lily, a 17-year-old beauty, and Jake, a 15-year-old genius who seemed to be born with a chip in his brain instead of a heart. My life was measured, filled with small joys. In the morning, a cup of hot coffee on the porch, listening to the birdsong that, sadly, grew fainter each year. In the afternoon, working in the garden, where I grew the juiciest tomatoes and the most fragrant roses. In the evening, reading or sifting through old letters. These letters were my ritual. Letters from my great-grandmother, who lived through the Great Depression, letters from my grandfather, who fought in World War II, letters from my mother, who wrote about life in post-war America. Each letter was a piece of history, a living voice from the past. I transcribed them, organized them, added my own comments, hoping that someday my grandchildren would appreciate this effort. I believed that these lines contained wisdom that would help them navigate this crazy, rapidly changing world. I was especially proud of the collection of letters my grandmother, Evelyn, wrote to her brother during his army service in the 1940s. They were full of life, hope, fears, and an unwavering faith in the future. They described details of daily life that you wouldn't find in any history textbook, how they rationed sugar, how they rejoiced at every package, how they listened to wartime radio broadcasts, holding their breath. I felt that these letters weren't just words on paper, but tangible proof of their resilience, their love, their humanity. I bound them into a beautiful book, adding photographs and my own notes, and called it Voices of the Past. I dreamed that one day Lily and Jake would sit beside me, and I would read these letters to them, and they would ask questions, and we would travel through time together. I imagined their eyes lighting up with interest, how they would understand that true wisdom isn't hidden in algorithms and likes, but in the living stories of people. I saw them finally appreciating the value of family ties that stretch across generations. And then that day came. Sunday brunch at Sarah's. The whole house was filled with hustle and bustle, laughter, the aroma of freshly baked rolls. Lily sat, utterly absorbed, her phone practically fused to her hand. She was probably scrolling through endless TikTok feeds, her thumb a blur, or maybe curating the perfect Instagram story, adding filters and emojis with practiced ease. Jake, meanwhile, was hunched over his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's glow, muttering about optimizing neural network parameters for some new AI project. My children, Sarah and Tom, tried to balance cooking with attempts to get their children's attention, their voices often lost in the digital hum that filled the room. It was a typical scene for 2025. Screens had become extensions of hands, and the real world, just a backdrop for digital life. I decided this was my chance. I brought my precious book, Voices of the Past, wrapped in a silk scarf. My heart pounded like a schoolgirl's before an exam. I approached Lily, who seemed to be glued to her phone. "Lily, dear, look what I brought," I said, carefully unwrapping the scarf. She looked up, but her gaze was unfocused, as if she was looking through me. Her eyes, accustomed to the vibrant, fleeting images of her feed, barely registered the worn leather and yellowed pages. "What is it, Grandma?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the screen. "These are your great-grandmother's letters, Lily. She wrote them during the war. They're so touching, so real. Do you want me to read them to you?" My voice trembled with excitement. Lily sighed, a sound that carried a hint of impatience, her gaze sweeping indifferently over the old, yellowed paper. "Oh, Grandma, those are just old letters. Why would I want that? I have TikTok, Instagram, all the news is there. It's just, well, digital dust. Who reads that anymore?" She shrugged, and her fingers slid across the screen again, already back in her digital world. The words, digital dust, hit me like a slap. Digital dust. My treasure, my years of work, my connection to the past, all of it was just dust to her. I felt something break inside me. A sharp, searing pain of rejection. But I didn't give up. I turned to Jake, who seemed to be in his own universe, typing furiously. "Jake, what about you? This is history, this is real data. You love to analyze everything, don't you? There's so much information here about how people lived, how they coped with difficulties." I tried to appeal to his logical mind, hoping the word data would catch his attention. He finally tore himself away from his laptop, his eyes, usually full of concentration, now filled with slight irritation. "Grandma, come on. That's an analog format. Inefficient. If it were in the cloud, I'd understand. But like this, it's just a pile of paper. I need to process terabytes of data, not decipher someone's scribbles. It doesn't scale, you know. It's just irrelevant. The past is the past. What matters is now, and what will be tomorrow. And tomorrow is AI, it's neural networks, it's virtual reality. Not dusty letters." He gestured vaguely at the book, as if it were an alien artifact. His words were even more painful than Lily's. Irrelevant. Dusty letters. My own grandchildren, flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, rejected my legacy, my work, my wisdom. They looked at me like a relic, like something outdated and unnecessary. My children, Sarah and Tom, came over, their faces etched with a familiar mixture of concern and resignation, trying to smooth things over. "Mom, you know, kids are different now," Sarah said softly, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the underlying weariness. They live in a different world. It's hard for them to understand the value of what came before. Maybe you could just upload it all to some cloud service? Or make an audiobook? Then they'd be more interested. Tom nodded, his expression equally strained. "Yeah, Mom. It's just a matter of format. You've always been progressive. Well, try to adapt." He offered a weak, conciliatory smile. Their words were spoken with love, but they only intensified my pain. They didn't understand either. They saw the problem in the format, not in the attitude itself. They didn't see that it wasn't about how I presented it, but that they didn't see the value in the content itself, in the very idea of connecting with the past. They were so absorbed in the present and the future that the past simply ceased to exist for them. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, a hot sting behind my eyelids, but I held them back. I wouldn't show them my weakness. I just silently closed the book, wrapped it back in the scarf, and placed it on the table. My heart ached with hurt and disappointment, a dull throb that resonated deep within my chest. I had come to them full of hope, and I left feeling gutted. For the rest of the day, I felt like a stranger at this celebration of life. I watched Lily and Jake, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of their screens, sharing memes and inside jokes that were entirely lost on me. They exchanged messages with friends, their fingers flying across keypads, living in their digital world where there was no room for old letters, for family stories, for real conversation. I saw how this screen world was consuming them, tearing them away from their roots, from true values. The vibrant energy of their youth seemed entirely channeled into this virtual existence. When I returned home, the silence in my house was no longer comforting, but oppressive. I sat in my favorite armchair, holding the book, Voices of the Past. Its weight felt incredibly heavy, a physical manifestation of my emotional burden. Digital dust. That word echoed in my head, a cruel taunt. Was everything I had collected, preserved, cherished, just dust? Were my grandchildren forever lost to living history, to real connections? I looked at the book's cover, at the yellowed pages, at my grandmother's familiar handwriting. In those letters was life, pain, love. How could they not see it? How could they be so blind? I felt alone, like the last guardian of a vanishing world. A world where words had weight, where stories were passed down orally, where the past was the foundation for the future. But that world, it seemed, was rapidly disappearing, displaced by a world of quick likes, fleeting trends, and superficial connections. I knew I couldn't just give up. This wasn't just my hobby, it was my duty. A duty to those who came before me, and to those who would come after. I had to find a way to reach them, to break through this digital wall. But how? How could I make them see the value in what they so easily rejected? My thoughts fluttered like butterflies in a jar, restless and uncontained. I was old, but not broken. I had been through a lot in my life, losing my parents, the Vietnam War, economic crises, the death of my husband. I had learned to be resilient, to be resourceful. And I knew that this test was not the last. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the stars that were already beginning to emerge in the darkening Los Angeles sky. They were the same as they had been hundreds of years ago. They hadn't changed. It was people who changed their values, their priorities. But I believed that true values, love, family, history, were eternal. I felt something new stirring within me, not just resentment, but a quiet, burning determination. A determination to fight for what I believed in. For my family. For my legacy. Jake and Lily's words, like sharp shards, lodged deep in my soul. Digital dust. Irrelevant. I, Helen, who had always considered myself a keeper of living history, suddenly found myself in the position of a relic, a dusty artifact from a bygone era. The hurt was searing, a constant ache, but beneath it, like an ember under ashes, smoldered a stubborn determination. I couldn't allow my legacy, the blood and sweat of generations, to become mere trash in their eyes. I couldn't allow them to lose connection with what makes us human, with our roots, with our shared history. The first few days after that ill-fated brunch were filled with heavy contemplation. I sifted through the letters, reading every line, trying to understand how something so priceless to me had become invisible to them. I observed my grandchildren when they visited or when we video chatted. Their eyes were constantly drawn to screens, their fingers glided across smooth surfaces, and their attention seemed to be fragmented into 1,000 tiny pieces, always ready to jump to the next notification or trending video. They lived in a world where information was instant, superficial, and, as I saw it, devoid of depth. I began my own research project, a venture into the digital unknown. I, who had always preferred paper books and handwritten notes, started to immerse myself in their world. I asked Sarah to show me how to use TikTok and Instagram. My fingers, accustomed to turning pages, awkwardly slid across the screen, often hitting the wrong buttons. I saw endless streams of short videos, flickering images, headlines that screamed sensationalism but offered no substance. It was a world where attention was a commodity, and depth was a luxury few could afford. I noticed how easily they trusted the information they saw online. Lily could spend hours watching videos about fashion or makeup, absorbing every tip and trick from influencers. Jake, meanwhile, was engrossed in new technologies and cryptocurrencies, citing online forums and tech gurus as gospel. They quoted bloggers and influencers as if they were unquestionable authorities. Their naivete struck me, their inability to distinguish truth from fiction, a carefully crafted image from a real person. My life experience, accumulated over 75 years, screamed at me, "Be careful. All that glitters is not gold." But they, it seemed, lived in a world where everything glittered, and everything was true. One detail particularly alarmed me. Jake, my brilliant grandson, who had always been such a skeptic when it came to anything traditional, suddenly became obsessed with some educational platform that promised to revolutionize learning through AI mentors. He spent hours on it, headphones clamped over his ears, but his grades, on the contrary, began to decline. He became more irritable, less attentive to those around him, often snapping if interrupted. When I tried to ask him about this platform, he brushed me off, saying I didn't understand modern technology. "Grandma, this is the future. This is personalized learning based on my needs. The AI mentor knows what I need better than any teacher," he said with glowing eyes, his voice filled with an almost religious fervor. Of course, I didn't understand all the intricacies, but something in his words put me on edge. "And how do you know this AI mentor really knows what you need, Jake? Who created it? What's its purpose?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and inquisitive. He just snorted, a dismissive sound. "Grandma, it's obvious. It's AI. It's objective. It doesn't make mistakes." His blind faith in the objectivity and infallibility of algorithms worried me. My 75 years have taught me that nothing in this world is absolutely objective, especially when it comes to influencing people's minds. I knew that behind every algorithm were people, with their own goals, with their own biases. I started digging deeper, a quiet, methodical investigation. I began reading articles about AI, about big data, about how algorithms shape our perception of the world. It wasn't easy. My brain, accustomed to linear thinking and the tangible feel of paper, struggled to grasp these new, complex concepts. But I was persistent. I went to the local library, where a young, very patient librarian named Maria helped me understand the basics of digital literacy. She explained what phishing was, how recommendation algorithms work, how to distinguish fake news from real. She even showed me how to use search engines effectively, a skill I'd always taken for granted. One day, while scrolling through Lily's Instagram feed, a task that still felt alien to me, I stumbled upon an advertisement for a genealogy service that promised to uncover your entire family history in minutes with AI. I scoffed. My Voices of the Past was decades of painstaking work, and they promised, in minutes? It seemed too good to be true. But then I saw that Lily had liked the ad, and even left a comment. Cool. Maybe that's how I'll finally find out who my ancestors are. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the bridge. I realized I couldn't just force my letters on them. I needed to show them that my digital dust contained something that wasn't in their shiny, instant world. Something deeper, something more real. I decided to use their own weapon, technology. But not to compete with them, but to show them that deep, true history cannot be created by algorithms. My plan began to take shape. I remembered how, in my youth, when George was still alive, we were both keen ham radio operators. We had an old shortwave receiver, and we would listen for hours to voices from different corners of the world. This was before the internet, before cell phones. It was a real miracle, to hear someone thousands of miles away, just through radio waves. I thought about how important it was then to be able to listen and distinguish signals, to separate noise from information, a skill that seemed so lacking in the digital age. I decided I needed to create something that would be both technological and personal. Something that would make them listen. I started by rereading all of Grandma Evelyn's letters. I wasn't looking just for facts, but for emotions, nuances, those small details that make a story come alive. I noticed that in several letters, she mentioned a family heirloom, that they were supposed to pass down from generation to generation. She described it as the key to our past, but never named it directly. It was a mystery I had never been able to solve. And then it hit me. What if this heirloom wasn't a physical object? What if it was a metaphor? A metaphor for history itself, for the knowledge passed down orally, from letter to letter? I decided my plan would have two parts. First, I had to show them that their educational platform and genealogy service might not be so harmless. Second, I had to prove that my digital dust contained real, living wisdom that algorithms couldn't generate. I bought myself a new tablet. It wasn't easy. I had always been against gadgets, but now it was necessary. I learned to use image editing programs to create simple web pages. Maria, the librarian, proved to be an invaluable helper. She taught me the basics of coding, showed me how to create QR codes, and how to use cloud storage. My fingers ached from the unfamiliar work, my eyes tired from the bright screen, but I didn't give up. Every small victory, creating a new page, successfully uploading a file, gave me strength. I selected several of Grandma Evelyn's letters that contained hidden clues about the family heirloom. I digitized them, but then deliberately corrupted some words to make them difficult to read, adding a layer of mystery. I created a series of QR codes, each leading to a fragment of a letter. I planned to hide these codes throughout the house, and then give my grandchildren the key, the first, simplest letter. My plan was simple. They had to find these codes, decipher the letters, and then, by connecting all the fragments, solve the mystery of the family heirloom. I wanted them to get a taste of real research, the thrill of discovery, the understanding that information isn't always on the surface. I wanted them to realize that true history isn't just a collection of facts, but a living process of searching, analyzing, and connecting the dots. While I worked on my quest, I continued to observe Jake and his AI mentor. I noticed that the platform started offering him more and more courses on financial literacy and investing in the future. All of them were related to some obscure cryptocurrency that, according to the AI, guaranteed incredible growth. This set off alarm bells in my mind. My life experience told me that guaranteed growth was always a red flag, a phrase often used by those looking to exploit others. I began to dig deeper into this cryptocurrency and the company behind the educational platform. It wasn't easy. The information was fragmented, often contradictory, buried under layers of jargon and marketing fluff. But I was persistent. I used all my connections, all my knowledge of how the world works, honed over decades. I called old friends who worked in finance, consulted with lawyers I had worked with in my youth. I even attended several online webinars on cybersecurity for seniors, where I learned about common scam schemes and red flags. And the more I dug, the more convinced I became that something was amiss. The company that owned the platform was registered offshore, its founders were anonymous, and the cryptocurrency they were so actively promoting had all the hallmarks of a Ponzi scheme. This wasn't just irrelevant, it was dangerous. My grandchildren, with their blind faith in technology and instant gratification, were ideal victims. I felt a righteous anger brewing within me, a cold fury that settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just indifference to my legacy, it was something far more sinister. It was a scam targeting my grandchildren, their future, their hard-earned savings. I realized that my letter quest had to become not just a way to show them the value of history, but also a way to open their eyes to the danger lurking in the digital world. I had to show them that critical thinking, the ability to analyze information rather than just trusting it, was not digital dust, but a vital skill, a shield against deception. The tension mounted. I saw Jake delving deeper into this platform, his eyes glazed with belief in the promises of easy money. Lily, in turn, became obsessed with the idea of quick success on social media, buying likes and followers from dubious services that promised to make her a star, desperate for validation in the digital sphere. Both of them, in different ways, were vulnerable to the illusions created by the digital world. I had almost finished my quest. The letters were digitized, the puzzles were hidden, the QR codes were printed. My heart pounded with anticipation and fear. I didn't know how they would react. Would they laugh? Would they ignore me again? Or maybe, just maybe, they would finally see. I stood by the window, looking out at nighttime Los Angeles. The city glowed with millions of lights, each representing someone's life, someone's story. And somewhere out there, in that vast, sparkling city, my grandchildren were on the verge of falling victim to a deception so cleverly disguised as progress. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. My hands, though aching from the unaccustomed work, were filled with a quiet, unwavering determination. My mind, though tired from new knowledge, was clear. I was old, but I was wise. And I knew I had something these algorithms didn't: life experience, intuition, and an unwavering love for my family. But what she learned or did next turned all expectations upside down. You won't believe how it ended. The day of the quest arrived. I, Helen, invited Sarah, Tom, Lily, and Jake over for what I called a family remembrance day. They arrived, as always, phones in hand, with a slight air of boredom on their faces, clearly expecting another one of Grandma's old-fashioned activities. I tried to hide my intense nervousness, a flutter in my stomach that belied my calm exterior. My heart pounded like a drum, anticipating and fearing their reactions. My dears, I began, holding the first, simplest letter from my Grandma Evelyn, its paper soft and worn with age. Today I want to offer you a little adventure. It's not a phone game, but it has puzzles you need to solve. Lily rolled her eyes, a familiar teenage gesture, and Jake raised an eyebrow skeptically, his usual analytical gaze tinged with impatience. Grandma, what is it? Another attempt to make us read old letters, he mumbled, already reaching for his phone. Not exactly, I smiled, a small, knowing curve of my lips, handing them the printed letter. This is the first link in the chain. It contains a clue that will lead you to the next. The letter was short, but within its ordinary phrases about weather and news, a sentence was highlighted: look where time stands still, and every moment is eternity. Next to the phrase was a neatly affixed small QR code. Lily was the first to react, her curiosity piqued by the familiar digital symbol. Her fingers, accustomed to instant scanning, quickly aimed the camera at the code. Oh, a QR code? This is more interesting, she muttered, and a flicker of genuine curiosity appeared on her face, replacing the boredom. Jake, seeing this, put his phone down and leaned closer, intrigued. The QR code led them to a simple web page I had created. On it was a fragment of the next letter, but with several intentionally corrupted words, replaced by question marks. Next to each such word was a small magnifying glass icon. What's this nonsense? Jake frowned, his analytical mind already trying to make sense of the puzzle. The words are unreadable. And what's with the magnifying glass? The magnifying glass means you need to find that word, I explained, my voice gentle but firm. It's hidden somewhere here in the house, in another letter. Look where the past meets the present, and light penetrates through the ages. I watched as they, at first reluctantly, began to search the room. Lily, surprisingly agile, quickly found the next QR code, tucked behind an old, framed photograph of my grandmother on the mantelpiece. Jake, with his analytical mind, quickly grasped the logic of my clues, his initial skepticism giving way to a competitive spark. They moved from one letter to another, from one QR code to another, slowly but surely immersing themselves in the story. As they found new fragments, I saw how their attitude changed. The initial skepticism was replaced by curiosity, and then by genuine fascination. They began to argue, good-naturedly, over who could find the next clue faster, who could decipher the corrupted word more accurately. I saw them finally reading these letters, really delving into their meaning, trying to understand the context, the lives behind the words. They were no longer just scanning, they were engaging. One fragment of Grandma Evelyn's letter contained a particularly poignant description of her anxiety during the war, mentioning a new, shiny offer that seemed too good to be true and promised quick riches, but required blind faith. I had specifically chosen this fragment, hoping it would resonate with Jake's situation. Listen, Jake, Lily said, reading aloud, her voice thoughtful. New, shiny offer. That sounds like your AI platform, not so? Grandma Evelyn also faced something similar. Jake frowned, his usually impenetrable face now showing a flicker of confusion, then dawning realization. But that was in the 40s. What does that have to do with AI? Does fraud change? I asked gently, my gaze steady. Only the tools change. The essence remains the same, the promise of easy money, the demand for blind faith. It was at this moment that I decided to deliver my main blow. The last QR code led them to the most important letter, the one where Grandma Evelyn mentioned a family heirloom as the key to our past. But this time, I didn't corrupt the words. Instead, I added a link to the article I had found in my research, an article about how scammers use AI to create fake educational platforms and promote dubious cryptocurrencies, preying on the trust of young, tech-savvy individuals. Jake read the article. His face, which had been bright with the thrill of the quest, now paled, a stark contrast to his usual confidence. He began to frantically double-check the information about his educational platform and the guaranteed cryptocurrency on his own phone. He saw, with chilling clarity, how all the signs described in the article, offshore registration, anonymous founders, promises of incredible profit, the pressure to invest quickly, matched. He realized he was on the verge of losing all his college savings, the money he had diligently saved from his coding projects. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice filled with shock and shame, his eyes wide with disbelief. I can't believe it. This is a scam. All this time. I almost fell for it." He looked up at me, his usual analytical gaze now clouded with vulnerability. Lily, who had been engrossed in solving puzzles until this moment, also read the article over his shoulder. Her eyes widened in horror. She remembered her genealogy service and the quick success she had sought on social media. She realized that her likes and followers were part of a carefully orchestrated scheme, designed not to boost her online presence, but to harvest her personal data and sell her fake, useless services. "My genealogy," she said, her voice trembling, her eyes filling with tears. "They promised me my whole family history, and actually, they just wanted my data. And these boosting services, that's a scam too." She looked utterly devastated. Sarah and Tom, who had been observing all this from the kitchen, their initial amusement turning to quiet concern, were now utterly stunned. Their faces mirrored their children's shock, then a dawning realization of their own oversight. They couldn't believe that their children had been so close to falling victim to such sophisticated schemes. They looked at me, at Helen, with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time, a mixture of profound respect and deep, heartfelt gratitude. "But how did you know, Grandma?" Jake asked, still trying to process what had happened, his voice barely above a whisper. "My grandpa always said, truth isn't what you're told, it's what you find yourself," I said, my voice steady, looking them each in the eyes. I just followed his advice. And I knew that true wisdom isn't something you can find in algorithms. It's passed down from generation to generation. It's contained in these letters. And then I revealed the final puzzle, the true meaning of the quest. The family heirloom Grandma Evelyn wrote about isn't a physical object. It's a metaphor. It's our history. It's the wisdom we gain from those who came before us. It's the ability to think, to analyze, to distinguish truth from lies. That's what saved you today. My grandchildren, Lily and Jake, for the first time in a long time, looked at me not as a relic, but as a savior. Their eyes were filled not only with shame but with deep understanding and a newfound reverence. They understood that my digital dust had proven to be far more valuable, far more protective, than all the shiny, empty promises of the digital world. "Grandma," Lily came to me and hugged me so fiercely, so genuinely, as never before. "I'm so sorry. I was so foolish. I didn't understand how important this was." Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. Jake, though less overtly emotional, also came over and clasped my hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong. "Grandma, you saved me. You were right. I was so blinded by these technologies, by the promise of easy money, that I couldn't see the obvious. Thank you." His eyes, usually so focused on screens, now held a newfound respect for me. Sarah and Tom, their faces still etched with the lingering shock, also approached, their eyes moist with tears of relief and regret. "Mom, we're also to blame," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "We should have been more attentive. You always tried to tell us this, and we didn't listen. We just thought they were different kids." Tom nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. We got caught up in the convenience of it all, Mom. We let them drift too far into that digital world without enough guidance. Thank you for pulling them back. In that moment, I felt the wall that had separated us, the invisible barrier of misunderstanding and generational disconnect, finally crumble. It wasn't just a reconciliation, it was a profound reunion. We were a family again, bound not just by blood, but by visible, tangible threads of shared understanding and a renewed appreciation for our common history. But that wasn't the end. As we sat together, the tension slowly easing, rereading Grandma Evelyn's letters, Jake, ever the analyst, suddenly exclaimed, "Wait." In this letter, she mentions a big storm brewing on the coast, and that only those who prepared in advance, those who had a safe haven, would survive. And she talks about a hideaway where they kept supplies. This isn't just about the weather, Grandma. His finger traced the faded words on the page. I frowned, a new puzzle presenting itself. I had always thought that particular passage was a metaphorical description of the hardships of war, a reflection of the general anxiety of the times. But now, with all of us attuned to searching for hidden meanings, for deeper truths, I realized Jake was right. In the letter, there were very specific details about a hideaway and preparation that seemed too concrete for a simple metaphor. Jake, with his sharp, analytical mind, quickly put the pieces together. He remembered that in the family archive, which I had so carefully preserved, there were old blueprints of our house, drawn by my grandfather. We found them. And there, on one of the plans, almost imperceptible, was a tiny, faded mark, a small cross in the basement, under the old pantry. We descended into the cool, musty air of the basement. Under the pantry, behind old, dusty boxes and forgotten holiday decorations, we discovered a small, well-camouflaged niche. It was expertly hidden, a testament to my grandfather's ingenuity. Inside lay an old, sealed metal box, heavy with its contents. We opened it, our breaths held in anticipation. Inside were not jewels, not gold, but something far more valuable in its own way. There were old war bonds that had once been worth pennies, but over the years, thanks to compound interest and unexpected appreciation in value due to market shifts, had quietly transformed into a substantial fortune. And next to them, a letter from my grandfather, addressed to future generations. In it, he wrote that these bonds were their lifeline in case of a big storm, which might not only be war but also an economic storm. He had foreseen that one day a crisis might come when digital money could lose its value, and only real assets could truly save the family. And then it hit me, a wave of profound understanding washing over me. This wasn't just foresight. This was a direct, tangible warning. My grandfather, who had lived through the Great Depression, knew that economic crises were cyclical, that the stability of any system was never guaranteed. He had left us not just money, but a profound wisdom about financial security, which I, like my grandchildren, had at some point underestimated, relying too heavily on the apparent stability of the modern financial system. It was at this precise moment, when Jake had just narrowly avoided losing all his savings due to digital fraud, and we discovered these bonds, that the true significance became blindingly clear. Grandma Evelyn's and Grandpa's wisdom was not just history. It was essential. It saved us not only from the current, immediate problem of the AI scam but also prevented a much larger, insidious catastrophe, an economic vulnerability that we hadn't even suspected. If Jake had lost his money, it could have become the catalyst for a chain reaction, leading to much more serious financial problems for the entire family, especially considering my own modest retirement savings and the constantly rising costs of American healthcare. These bonds became our unexpected financial buffer, a true, safe haven, that would allow us to weather any future economic storm my grandfather had warned about. The ending was not just happy, it was deeply instructive and profoundly meaningful. We, as a family, gathered together again, truly connected. Lily and Jake began to spend more time with me, not just listening to my stories, but actively asking questions, sharing their thoughts, and seeking my perspective on their own challenges. They understood, with a newfound clarity, that the past wasn't just digital dust, but a living, breathing source of wisdom, a wellspring of resilience that could guide and protect them in the future. They even began to keep their own family journal, recording their thoughts, their experiences, their own stories, to pass on to the next generations, ensuring the threads of our history would never again be broken. I, Helen, understood that my mission wasn't over. I was not just a guardian of the past, but a vital bridge between generations. I had learned to use new technologies, not to replace the old, but to enhance them, to weave them into the fabric of our shared narrative. I understood that true wisdom is not only knowledge but also the ability to adapt, the ability to see value in every moment, in every story, in every person, regardless of the format it comes in. Sometimes, when I sat on the porch, listening to the birds sing, I thought about how much had changed. The world had become faster, more complex, but human values, love, family, history, wisdom, remained unchanged, eternal anchors in a turbulent sea. And I knew that as long as there were people like me, willing to fight for these values, willing to bridge the divides, the future of our family, and perhaps the world, would be safe. My letters, my digital dust, turned out to be more than just words on paper. They were the key to salvation.